There we go.
All right.
Okay, Simon, welcome.
Hi,
Um,
it's fun to be here.
right. So we want to talk with you about a whole bunch of stuff, but we want to squeeze it down to a reasonable amount of time. One of the things we want to talk about is that just last week in our course, we adapted some of the workshop you did at PyCon about using LLM both off the command line and being able to prompt write code that calls from Python into it. And I want to talk a little bit about just some of the changes we made to it and so forth, because we might actually all end up doing the same tutorial next month. There's a big hackathon at Maryland that tries to get a lot of women participants and so forth. So it'd be a good time to do that. Um, so, I mean, some initial comments. So I thought covering the material was great, but one of the things that I really like to do when trying to get students to learn something is not just show them material, but give them a task where in order to do this task, you have to actually use what you're being taught.
Yeah. Huh.
And in your workshop, there were a lot of, okay, try this, try this, try this. But there wasn't a lot that was sort of like, okay, here's something to explore and go
Mm,
off. And we saw that. And then also we wanted to teach students about writing Python code that calls into LLMs. The data extraction was a real good example
yeah.
to look into. Um, and so we're thinking that'd be good. And one of the things which was interesting is the FEMA example. That was really impressive. And I like showed that to some people like, wow, that's really cool. And then the question came up like, is that accurate? Because
It's a
we,
great question.
right,
Yeah.
Does it do it all the time, right?
right,
Is it consistent? Is it reliable?
right.
Especially given that FEMA task. Did you do the one with the map, the really complicated map
No, we
of
did the
the
basic one.
Just
Table.
base,
even the basic one? I was shocked the first time I tried that and even came close to working. Like that feels to me like it's a challenging task for them to take on. So it's interesting that the models are just getting to the point where they can do this, but reliably is the whole different question, right?
right. Well, yeah, reliably. And part of the problem is you want to know if it's correct, and that's really hard to have any assurance that's correct without having to
Hmm.
eyeball it. And really, what you want for something like that is you want the ability, like, oh, we want to inhale this data for all of the FEMA declarations over the past 3 years and build a
Right.
database,
Yep.
right? And so you're not going to eyeball all of them. You can eyeball a couple of them to see is it correct. So then you can check consistency, right? If I do it a bunch of times, is it consistent? Um, and of course, start doing it, and like you have some weird problems. Like sometimes, we use a multi-schema, like in your tool,
Mhm.
and sometimes the JSON would come back with items, and here's a list. Sometimes it would come back with declarations, and then
Right.
items. Sometimes requests.
And then sometimes we would get like the state name, the state abbreviation, and sometimes we'd get the state name. Like
Yes.
it would like sort of just leap from one to the other and then back again. And then so the question becomes, one of the questions becomes, how do we how do we evaluate consistency and quality and accuracy?
Right.
Like we have
Yeah.
some ways to do it, spot checking, random sampling, all the rest of it, but like it feels, I don't know, it feels like there might be not like something like how do you think about like
So
evaluating?
right now, I think spot checking and random sampling is probably the state of the art at the moment. Like it's frustrating, but that's kind of what we're stuck with. The other thing, something I haven't tried yet, but I really want to try, is trying different models and seeing if you get the same result. Like if both Claude 4 and GPT-5 agree on something, that's a stronger signal. Maybe you can mix Gemini into the mix as well. But it's difficult because some of the models are a lot worse at these than others. In surprising ways, GPT-5 I'm finding is much worse at OCR than the Gemini and Claude models, despite GPT-5 being super strong at all sorts of other things. I've used it to like OCR just a photograph of a newspaper article, and it made up some text in the middle, which is a crisis. Like that's the worst thing it could possibly do.
Right.
So my trust in GPT-5 was shaken by seeing that happen. So yeah, I feel like this is still an undecided thing for data journalism, especially, is we've got these tools that can do data entry and they're quite good, but they're not like just poke away and don't look at what it's doing yet, which is what you need if you're going to do 200 PDFs. So yeah, I think it's spot checks and it's about the spot checking and the trying to get a second opinion and so forth. But yeah, I don't think there's a 100% reliable process for this yet.
Yeah.
And the rate at which the models improve, I hate saying this, but it is kind of true that a year ago they were not very good at this stuff at all. That maybe Gemini 3 is probably going to be out in a few weeks' time. Maybe that's going to be a step change up that really affects things, but maybe it won't. Who knows? We're going to have to work quite hard to figure that
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
So one of the things that was interesting, you mentioned that sometimes it would come back with just the state abbreviation. Sometimes it would actually spell out the name. But when you
That we
look
can
at it,
solve.
sometimes it's not a state abbreviation, it's the abbreviation for an Indian territory,
Yeah.
Hmm.
right? And it's actually cool. Then it figures out, oh, there's an asterisk up there, and down at the bottom, it has an asterisk which spells it out. And
Yes,
so
so that
actually,
one we can solve. That's getting into you spot check a bunch and you try and catch these, and then you start iterating on your prompt. And in particular, giving it an example, if you say, and the output should look like this, there's just one example with a state abbreviation, it's going to use state abbreviations for everything. So that works. In this case, you want to throw in an example that has one of the Indian territories with the correct kind of formatting. So
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the art of this is it's iterating on the examples and finding the edge cases. If you look at these sort of vendor tools for this stuff, a lot of people now are selling very elaborate sort of trace recording tools that record absolutely everything and let you search through all of your traces and try and find these edge cases. And it's still a lot of manual work. Like there's a whole lot that goes into it.
something that was interesting that when I first started looking at this difference, like whether it would include the state name, it was often consistent within a single run.
I'd expect
But
that. Yeah.
because once it saw that it had generated a state name for the first one, it figures out, it's token
You know
prediction,
what?
good for the
I'd
rest of
be
them.
shocked to see an example where it wasn't consistent. If you ever get an example where it does CA1 and set California next, that would be super interesting because that's
Yeah.
not
But
my
what I
method
actually
of doing
did
things
was I
well.
actually changed the schema to give me the
Mm,
state or region abbreviation and state or abbreviation name
right.
as two different ones. That way I know I always want them both. I don't want them commingled.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. If you set sort of
That's a really good
isolate the
idea.
task. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Like make it a specific thing you want. Maybe that
But
would
also,
difference.
yeah. And if you ask for both, it's always going to get it right because it'll be, okay, well, I put the CA in this one, I put California in the other one, and there's no other options for what I might want to do.
Right. And then there were a couple other places where that was sort of like could be text and it was different. A couple of times, there's this thing where the date in the table doesn't include the year and it's supposed
Mhm.
to add the current year. It doesn't always get the current year added in correctly. Um,
I've actually had a great result with that in the past where I had a demo where I'd set it up so I could take a photograph of an event flyer on a poster board somewhere and it would add that to my calendar. And
yeah.
then I tried it and it added it to my calendar with the wrong day of the year. And
Mhm.
I'm like, what's going on there? And then I realized that the flyer was a year old and
Mhm.
that date in 2000 and no, it said Friday, the 5th of whatever.
Mhm.
And this year that date was a Monday, but last year that date was Friday, and it figured that out and it actually put the correct year in. So I
Right.
thought I had a date for it. I'm like, why are we adding a 2024 event? And it's because actually the post was a year old and it guessed from the day of the week.
Right.
That was interesting, you know.
Right. So actually, let me show you. So I, ran GPT-5 like 40 times and actually I picked a particular date. So I could just do that same
Huh?
date over and over as opposed to current. So I can rerun the test.
Yeah.
Um, oops, actually, let me go back. I'm going to
Oh,
get rid of
gotcha.
something to give it to ignore the non-significant ones. Okay.
This is great.
So there's supposed to be 13 items. In one of
Mhm.
the runs, there were 14 items listed. So it came up with a different row. Uh,
Yep.
I actually, because like New York occurs twice in this file because there were two different ones,
Yep.
I the date. But it turned out that in one case, it plugged in the wrong year.
Hmm.
And so about half of the cases, but this was the scary stuff. These things like, is there an X in this column?
Uh-huh.
Not consistent, right?
And this is the thing that really scares me, especially about tables, because I've seen so many cases of these things where there's a table and every now and then it just gets the wrong column. It misalign it for some reason it figures that this thing in this column was actually in this other column, which is disastrous.
Yeah.
And that's why I get excited. I got excited. Like again, last year I was running this and it hardly ever worked at all. This year, especially the Gemini 2.5 model seems to be much more reliable at that. But much more reliable is not the same thing as 100%. So yeah, and analyses like this are a fantastic idea.
Yeah. So like there was this one column where it was like, 50-50 each time. For here in Nebraska, it almost like it flipped the PA and HM column
Hmm.
totals
Once, yeah.
once, right? And we see that in a couple of cases where, two things were basically flipped in 1 year,
So
in
you
one
ran this
run,
what? This is 40 runs, right? Or 50 runs?
Yeah.
40 runs.
This is 40 runs. Have you tried saying, okay, given all of this, what's if we just have a vote on every single piece of data across those 40 runs, do you get 100% correct results if you like treat them as a
Well,
pound?
in looking at this run, that would almost always work, except in this case.
Almost always is always the problem, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right. But on the other hand, so the other thing about extracting data is it is rare that the tools say, I'm unsure,
Yeah.
Hmm.
or you don't have a way to do it. And what I would do with this, if this was the thing I had to do, I'd run it like 20 times. And if it's, 90% of the time, it's always one way, I say, okay, that's the answer.
Yeah.
If
Hmm.
it's split more than that, I'd say we are unsure of this result.
Yep.
Right.
Um, I have tried in a few places, not so much for this one, but for other cases where there's, um, Derek has this one example of some 1930 census data that's from a very bad scan. Or some of the other
Yeah.
examples I looked at where you say, please give me the confidence you have in translating this.
Yeah.
And at least the models I tried were not actually that good about coming up with a confidence matter.
Yeah.
There is a very sophisticated way you can get confidence scores out of some of the models. None of the modern models, unfortunately, but there are these things called logits where you can basically, I think the older GPTs, you could tell them to give you back the probability of each token.
Right.
So when it gets to state colon IA, you'd get back a probability that said zero point 0.6 probability of IA as opposed to 0.9. So people in the past were trying to use that for confidence scores. I think most of the labs don't reveal those numbers anymore because they're sort of sensitive and you can use them to clone their models and stuff, which is frustrating because but the local models do it. You could run like a llama with a whole bunch of irritating code around it and maybe start getting a little bit more probability stuff out of those. It's just they're quite weak models, so it's probably not worth spending the time on them.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, this is just an interesting problem. You see stuff like this, and it makes you really worry about
Yep.
any use
Of
of
your
using
process.
data extraction.
I will say, like when we did this similar thing last year, Simon, was one of the projects. The hardest thing, the thing that fell down the most was, is there an X in this box?
Yeah.
Like numbers and like tables, it was better at, but like, is there an X in this box? Was really seemed to be a hard problem for.
This is one of those ones I would expect Gemini to do better than that because the Gemini models can actually return bounding boxes of things. Like they've got a
Yeah.
much stronger geometric set of features baked into them than GPT-5 or
Yeah.
Claude does.
And
But again, like it's on us to do really difficult work to figure these things out. None of the nobody's going to tell you if it's any good at these tasks, unfortunately.
so I ran it with a different flag to include some non-significant changes. And you see here that some of the like instant description, there's a
Uh-huh.
difference whether or not there's a dash and a space. Is that? Now
Yeah.
here is
Capitalization.
appeal.
That's a great one.
So,
Yep.
and this is one of the other things you sort of figure when you're trying to do this consistency things, you have to figure out what are all the different reasonable ways to normalize things and try to figure out
Mhm.
if it's significant. In this case, I just said, I don't think these particular keys are significant. Um, but you'd really want to have something more
Robust.
robust for
Yeah.
figuring out, is this a significant change or not?
Yeah.
Something that people do,
Mhm.
and I'm still not convinced by it, is they'll throw in another LLM call later on. They'll be like, hey, other LLM, is severe storm and tornadoes appeal similar enough to severe storm and tornado appeal lowercase? And it'll say yes or no. But now you're just throwing more random number generators into your
Right.
pipeline.
Now it's like second opinion from this other about this weird
Right.
machine. Ask another weird machine.
I think it might actually be a good way of doing it. I just can't get comfortable with layering even more of these things on top of each other
Right.
like that.
Or for some stuff where you're extracting, Derek had an example where we're pulling information out about sanctions against Maryland lawyers. And so there's some free text pulling, like, okay, but we know the text that's like summarize this description is not going to be the same, but could you
Yeah.
use like an embedding to figure out are these similar and so forth?
Yeah. As like a backstop of like, did it get the right stuff? So
Yeah.
Right. Well, particularly if the thing is, if you had something like you generate it 10 times
yeah.
and you look at the semantic difference between all of those and you could try to figure out, okay, this one's an outlier.
And I feel like we've got a cheat code in journalism specifically. We're not going to publish a story about somebody having a strike against them unless we've actually gone and looked at the real document. So if you treat these things as a sort of unreliable source of leads, and then you do the actual reporting on the leads to make sure that they're accurate, that can protect you from a bunch of things, but it can't protect you from reporting bad statistics. You know, if you say 57% of the 20,000 reports in here, I mean, that's just not feasible for you to then double check all 20,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. How do I turn off my sharing? Here we go, stop share.
There we go.
Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of other topics I'd love to cover with you, and we're going to run a little bit over our originally planned time, but we've got more time reserved in the conference room. So one of the other things, sort of, for students, particularly in the class, and just for people in general, one of the things I know you've talked a fair bit about is this idea of these LMs empower you to take that crazy question or idea you had and turn it in code. And actually, I was just hearing somebody talk about this might be one of the reasons why Sora 2 is a big hit, because it allows people to take this idea for a video that they wanted to create, but they would never go through a more complicated process to figure it out, but allows them to real quickly do it. And now with all these coding tools, all these things like, oh, I never would have I could implement this algorithm two different ways and see if they're giving me the same answers and see if which one is better and so forth. But so just run on this topic, the ability to take an idea or a question and turn it into code.
I think there's a few different ways to look at this. One of them is like prototyping tools. These are just I've spent my entire career prototyping things. That's always been my sort of superpowers. I'll go into a meeting with a illustrative prototype of whatever the thing is. And now I've got something which can knock out the prototype for me in often just a couple of minutes.
Right.
So it's almost inexcusable now to have an idea and not have some kind of janky prototype that you've knocked up just as an illustration, because you can learn so much from seeing that thing and seeing how well it does. And prototypes don't have to actually work. You know, you don't even need to review the code and make sure that it's doing the right kind of thing. You just sort of you vibe code it, right? You poke at it until you get roughly the right kind of shape and then move on. Then the other side of it is exploratory programming, and that's more like when I'm actually building production code, often you do need to explore. There are three algorithmic techniques I could use here for this feature. Which of those is the best one? And so I send these things off on sort of little scouting missions all the time. I'm like, okay, what if we were to model this as a hierarchy in our database? I had Claude do this for me just the other day, and it churns away. And very rarely, I mean, sometimes it'll produce code you can use, but even if it doesn't, if the code at least vaguely runs, the amount you can learn from it is extraordinary. You know, you can. Another trick I've started using recently is for very ambitious coding projects. I will fire off Claude Code on with that task, knowing that I'm not going to use any of the code it writes, but I will still learn from, oh, it had to update code in these 5 files. I'd forgotten that this file over here was relevant to this problem, or that it like comes up with a testing strategy, some of which I might adopt later on. And that's kind of amazing. It's also one of the opportunities where you can run more than one of these things at the same time. And this is a very new thing for me. I was quite resistant to the idea of running parallel, like coding agents, because the bottleneck is always my time reviewing what they've done. But if it's a research task, I don't need to look at everything that it's done. I just need to ask it to figure out if this will run faster if I put an index on this column, or like experiment with indexes and run a benchmark and show me some charts or whatever. And those you can fire off like 2 or 3 parallel things in the background, and then review them when you have your cup of coffee later on. So that's pretty interesting. And this is very new as well. Like I feel like this year has been a step change in what it's feasible to do with this stuff. A lot of it partly because the models got better, like Claude 4 and GPT-5 both came out within the past, 3 months, and are both significant upgrades in terms of what you can outsource to them. But also the tooling, these coding agents, these things that can write code, run the code, see if it worked, modify the code, try it again, install extra packages. Those are a total step change in the utility of these models and how much you can actually realistically do with them. And those Claude Code was the first major one of those, and it came out in February. So that's a very new category of software as well.
Yeah. One of the things that was interesting that came out is Imagine with Claude. And I've heard some people complain that, oh, but it doesn't let you export the code. But I think that might actually be a desirable feature.
Yeah, I think that's missing the point of it.
Right. it allowed the people at Claude to say, okay, let's not worry about whether or not the code that's going to come out is going to be maintainable or secure. This is just designed to let you get a prototype for an idea.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah,
I
I don't
have
know.
to
I mean,
admit,
the question is,
that one hasn't that one doesn't really. I love Claude artifacts, right? The sort of thing that came before Imagine, where you can tell it, build me a little like HTML JavaScript widget that does this. I
Right.
use those. God, I still 2 or 3 times a day, I will have it kick me out a little thing for all sorts of different stuff. Some of them are useful, some of them are just toys, some of them are help. I've been trying help me understand this tap dancing move. And they can't do that. They'll do you bad animations with blobs moving around. But someday, one of them's going to teach me a tap dancing step, and that's going to be a major sort of step forward. But yeah, the artifacts are the Imagine thing feels to me like a much more restricted version of artifacts. And as a sort of like diehard artifacts fan, it hasn't really vibed
Yeah, I
with
think
me
they're trying
yet.
to put the emphasis on like forcing you to think about things rather than like I
Hmm.
think they're trying to change like the balance of who does the imagining here, where it's like
Hmm.
maybe more on you. I think that's what they're trying to get at, and I think like it's an interesting sort of constraint to see if they could get people. I I don't think OpenAI would release a product like that. I just don't like I don't think that's how they imagine people using their stuff. I think this is like a feels like an Anthropic specific kind of tool.
Interesting. I mean, it is fun watching the labs just copy each other
Yeah.
mhm.
blatantly the whole time. Claude Artifacts came to ChatGPT as ChatGPT Canvas, and it's almost exactly the same feature with a different name. Both of them completely hidden. Like these are invisible features that you have to know to activate, which is frustrating. Anthropic finally launched their code interpreter tool, which is a direct copy of the one that OpenAI have had for like 2.5 years. And the Anthropic one is really good. And again, it's hidden. Like the only documentation on it right now is what I wrote because I had to reverse engineer the thing to figure out what it was,
Yeah.
which is deeply frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Want to try and move on to a few more topics. One of the things we want to get our students starting to use is dealing with the problem that, like, okay, you've been thrown a large code base and you have to fix a bug or add a new feature. And just looking at stuff, there seem to be all sorts of products out there that say, "Oh, you should use our special
Mhm.
setup, our thing that we've built on top of Claude or Codex and so forth. Use it." And just your opinion, like, are any of these tools particularly useful, or just using Claude or Codex good for these?
So
What would you recommend?
again, a year ago, trying to navigate around a large code base just didn't work. You were still on your own. Today, I think the problem is effectively solved, and it's solved by a pattern. This is the coding agent pattern, the thing where it can write code and duck around. And the ones that you want are the ones that can run terminal commands for you.
Right.
So Claude Code and Codex CLI are the two really big ones. There's a Gemini CLI as well. The text editors like VS Code and Cursor now have agent modes that can do this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
What you need them to be able to run commands because then they can run searches on all of the code base. So you can say you tell them I've got this bug, and it will basically grep for functions relating to that. It'll find the function, and then because it can just run in a loop and keep on searching, it'll say, "Oh, that calls this function. Search for that function. That calls this. Search for that. This class inherits that." And you can watch them churn away, and they will read dozens of different files in their sort of mission to uncover what's going on. And the other thing that matters is they have to be these reasoning models. This again is a new thing in 2025. So GPT-5 is a reasoning model. Claude 4 has reasoning modes. Gemini can do it as well. If you've got combined reasoning with the ability to run a search against a code base, they can figure it out. Like the amount of debugging they can do now against extraordinarily like millions of lines of code, they will just read like the 10,000 lines of code that are relevant, and about 6 out of 10 times they will figure out what's going on for you. And
Is
then sometimes you'll see them write their own debugging code. They'll like modify the code and add some print statements and then run it and see what comes out. And that's getting a bit spooky. That's like watching a senior engineer who knows what they're doing with debugging code, just tearing the thing apart and figuring out what's going on.
how do you I wanted to ask like very briefly how you like when you have to understand a large code base, like what's do you have a ways of getting started or does it depend on this task that you're trying to do?
Partly depends on the task. I still if it fits into 1 million tokens, which is a lot, I still dump the whole thing into Gemini and ask it to give me a README file with a outline of what this thing does and where the key code is and so forth. Sometimes when I'm doing that, I delete the documentation first because I like getting a fresh take on what the thing is. It's always interesting to see if it can, and that's partly because I like experimenting with things, but it's interesting to get a sort of ignore the documentation. What does the thing actually do? Where's the important code?
Right.
I'm starting to do that using just Claude Code and Codex CLI. I'll open them up in the thing and say, hey, explore this code base and write me some high-level systems architecture documentation. And that's beginning to work very well, which again is new. Like even 4 months ago, I
Yeah.
wouldn't trust them to be able to do that, and now they appear to be able to figure that out.
One of the things, there's this paper came out over the summer where they looked at, some professional software developers using AI coding tools in like a large mature code base.
Mhm.
And they found that when these senior developers working on large mature code base tried using the AI tools, that by at least some measure, they were not particularly productive.
I'm a little bit
And
skeptical of an aspect of that paper, which is the loneliness of it, because
well,
that
yes,
paper gets cited all the time, and it's a good paper. It is good. It's worth reading, but it's kind of just sits there as the single sort of example of overestimation. Software engineers saying, "Oh, it's amazing. It saved me so much time," and then you look at the numbers, and actually, it slowed them down. And I'm kind of looking for a bit more than that because there's so much evidence that they do speed people up. And there's this one paper that people will jump straight to as well. You see this paper where it was a 19% decrease, you know?
but there's an aspect of that which I think is perhaps underappreciated. So back up a little bit. During the pandemic, I started working for Apple, worked for them for 3 years. And I'd been using the API externally with their publicly visible API before I came on working for Apple. And after I came on, we signed the paperwork. I said, great, I'm in. Please show me the design documentation. I said, well, there's the
Hmm.
design documentation. Like, no, I've read that. I want the internal documentation. I said, well, there's the code. Like, no. Like, well, sorry, that's all there is. And
Apple's documentation is so bad. It's
right,
my there's closed source. So you can't look at the code if you're an outsider, and
right.
the docs are terrible. It's so frustrating.
And and anytime, you have a large mature code base, which is often not well documented, or if there was documented, it's not stored in the same repository and it hasn't been kept up to date
Yeah.
with all the changes. Bringing a new developer onto that project is a process, right? And you have to explain a bunch of stuff and a whole bunch of discussions in front of the whiteboard and so forth. To bring an AI model into working on that code base, you have to explain, it has to learn some of it, but there's also things which it's not necessarily going to pick up. And I think one of the advantages is that to have an AI model work well on these large mature code bases, the architecture design there needs to be a conversation perhaps with the senior developers and looking at the code and the AI to come up with design document that didn't actually previously exist in order to
Yes.
get the code written. And then, but the thing is, as a result of bringing the AI model in to do that, not only do you get code written for a task, but you've got design documentation
Yeah.
that was missing before, and makes
This is
the
something
next
which
time you
I
come
find
bring in an agent, it's going to be much more effective.
Yeah.
I wrote a piece on my blog about that just this morning about how the thing that's interesting about these coding agents specifically is good software engineering processes transfer directly to them. If you've got a comprehensive automated test suite and good architectural documentation and linters and automations and all of this stuff, they will fly. Like it's all of those benefits that work. And so actually, if you're a really experienced software engineer working in a team with gold standard like code review practices and linting and all of that, you're going to have so much of a better time adding these AI models in because they will benefit from that in the same way that your other engineers do. And I feel like that's an underappreciated. People make fun of vibe coding or whatever, and it's like, well, actually, if you want to really get good results, this is software engineering. This is all of the best practices suddenly start paying off even more.
Yeah. And so, in some ways, it's also just the whole idea that if you're going to be discussing with and working with an agent to make some changes in the code base, don't have the contribution from that just be the code.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of stuff in the discussion and the chat.
They should know what you know or what, like, they should know the context of it.
I had a great conversation with someone about this yesterday, where one of the big differences between a human coder and an AI coder is that human coders learn. Like it's worth having a conversation with a human coder and coaching them on things because they will learn that, and next time they'll do better. An LLM resets the slate every single time, but it doesn't have to if you add that piece at the end where you're like, okay, now let's make notes together on what we learned, like what's information that we should feed to you next time so that you do better. And you can get into this compounding effect where every time you use one of these to solve a problem and it forgets to run the tests or whatever, you add that into its instructions that get used next time. And over time, they get better and better and better, not because they're learning, but because you're using what you learn with them to reinforce it for next time.
Yeah.
But then one of the challenges that comes with that, okay, you've got a large, multi-million line code base. You've got, 6, 8 developers working on it. How do they all and they're all having these conversations. How do you get the results from that all sort of, so you don't have all sorts of change histories? I mean,
Uh-huh.
how does it wind up being in a consistent, I mean, where does it go in the source code repository?
Yeah.
Does everybody know? So that, there's a lot of how to organize that information in something that's not a single developer project. I'm not sure if,
I don't know how yeah, I'm not sure.
Nobody's figured that out yet, but that's like there are hundreds of engineering teams around the world right now trying to answer that exact question.
yeah,
And hopefully when they figure it out, they'll share it because
right.
yeah, it's total Wild West for this kind of stuff at the moment.
Um, we did have one other topic
Yeah.
that I think we'll just touch on very briefly, and I don't want to get into too deeply now. Maybe we'll have another conversation. Is this problem that as these AI coding tools are getting so much better, they've gotten so much better over the last year and so forth, that we're particularly interested in how to use these tools for students who are just beginning to learn how to program, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is if you gave them a tool from 2 years ago, it might have been at the right level to like do some code completion as I'm trying to write Python for the first time. But now they're so smart that as soon as they figure out, I mean, we had a project where they were going to play Wordle. And so as soon as I wrote def, analyze Wordle, parameters, guess, comma, answer, it wrote out the autocomplete generated the next 20 lines of code.
Yeah. Yeah, done.
Right. And so I actually came up with like custom instructions to sort of slow it down and tell like, no, you are not an answering machine. This is a student who's just learning. And I can imagine lots of things with wanting to, almost making that specific for like each project. Okay, these are the language constructs that this student should already know. These are the ones that they're learning on this project. Here's what we're trying to do, and a bunch of stuff about effectively how to be a good TA.
Yeah.
Right.
This one's so interesting as well because this is a problem that gets worse as the models get better.
Right.
Like you can figure it out and get a balance that works quite, and then boom, out comes the next version of the model, and suddenly it's it's solving all of those problems for you. So I think, and there are the AI labs have been working on this. ChatGPT added its learning mode. Claude Code, I just learned from you, has this explanatory and learning output style that you can set up. I've got no idea if those are any good yet. Like that's part of the challenge.
Right. And the thing is, I think the model's getting good. I think giving them unaltered to students, that's definitely not going to work.
Yeah.
But as they get better, they might be able to take good instructions about how to be a tutor.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, one of the things that occurred to me, one of the things we really need is we essentially need to have all these benchmarks for coding and so forth. We need to basically have some benchmarks on like, can you take a set of instructions for a student to acting as a tutor? And here's a problem statement. Here's a question asked by a student. Do you give appropriate answers?
An educational, like education benchmark.
Yeah, because like essentially you're solving you're solving a same fundamental larger problem, but like in very different ways, and the process matters, right?
Yeah.
How you do it matters. Whether you're going from 0 to 60 in a second, like that matters. You can't do that in classrooms.
I can give my intuition is this feels solvable to me. Like I think the models are good at instruction tuning and instruction following. This feels like the kind of thing you solve with prompting and like very well practiced, like well researched prompting with a lot of work. But it does Because the other thing is that you need the students to be like taking accountability for making sure they're learning. You know, if students want to cheat, they'll cheat. We've got cheating machines now. That's a whole thing. But what I kind of want to, like, I'm always learning new things. I would love to learn how to learn most effectively with these tools. Like that feels like an important sort of meta skill to develop.
Yeah.
Well, and you can also think about, like for the LLM tool or any piece of software, think about having a set of instructions that's a prompt from like, okay, this is somebody who's learning how to use your LLM tool, right?
Yeah.
What would that look like and how would it introduce them? And so you don't want something that a student asks, as soon as a person asks, how do I do this with LLM? You don't want to instantly spit out the code, right? You
Yeah.
want them to sort of walk them
Like
through
like a
it.
Socratic thing, like,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I
Yeah.
mean, or whatever the context is necessary for that task or that set of tasks. But it feels like like, we mostly, like you said, like sort of hide that or don't emphasize that because the impressive thing about these models is that they do produce results right away and those
Mm.
results are getting better. And that seems like the product.
Right.
But
But
for us, maybe not.
something I keep on hearing is that a lot of university have problems that students get to university and they don't know what a file and a folder is because they've grown up on iPhones and iPads and all of that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Mm.
It feels like, but that's where you can't even start to use something like Claude Code if you don't know what you, I mean, for Claude Code, you need to use the terminal and directories and files and folders and all of that sort of stuff. So there's something, maybe that would be an interesting project is how would you build an LLM assistant just to teach those fundamental computing skills that you need to start to get up to speed with the basics of this stuff?
Yeah.
But I think one of the, like I said, I think benchmarks are really going to be important, particularly as we look as like models change and so forth. But one of the things that I haven't figured out how to approach is like for some of the coding benchmarks, you can say, did it come up with a patch that fixed the errors? It's easy to verify whether or not they did. Seeing whether or not an answer is a good answer for a student who's
Yeah.
facing this challenge. I don't know how you automate that.
I mean, I don't know either, but like I think like there are the way that I suspect people will go about this is I was showing my class one of my classes the other day. There's a new vision model built on top of it's like an older version of Quinn's vision model, and it's like literally the model is called Soccer Chat, and you feed it video of soccer matches, and then it describes actions of soccer, and the training data is just literally clips of videos from soccer matches and then descriptions and answers and what's going on in those soccer matches. Like, I think the problem is like we're all trying to figure this out and we're all in some ways generating a little bit of training data, but we're not doing it in like a
Honestly, the state
systematic
of the art
way.
for this right now really is the LLM as a judge pattern, the thing where you use an you evaluate your LLM by having another LLM that's carefully prompted saying, was this a good answer for a fifth grade high school student and so forth. And that, again, it's difficult. It's stacking more of these things on top of each other. The thing that matters there is the rubric. You have to work really, really hard on the
Yeah.
rubric for how it will evaluate the output. And a lot of teams are doing exactly that. Like that really is, if you look at the vendor-based evaluation platforms, they're all building that out because it's the only thing that scales up.
Right.
But it's alarming because who evaluates the evaluators?
Right.
But
Right.
it is that's the state of the art at the moment.
Yeah. So, well, I think that's so we've got Leo Porter visiting from UCSD tomorrow, who's introduced LLMs to a number of the courses at San Diego. There's this whole Teach CS with AI is this
Hmm.
that they've come up with like 5 different courses that they've introduced
Yeah.
LLMs into. So it's a big topic. I know a lot of universities are looking at this, and hopefully, I haven't seen adequate attention to this. How do we get the LLMs into coach mode? But I think it's going to be critical.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so it's been great talking. We've
Yeah.
used up
Thanks,
your
Simon.
time. I'm looking forward to maybe find another time to chat. Maybe after a little bit more through the semester, we've done some of these things.
I'd love to learn what you learned from it. Like
Yeah.
it is, it's all so new.
Yeah.
All right. Great.
Thanks, Simon. It's
Thank
good to
you.
see you.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks a lot.
Yep. All right. So turn off recording. There we go. Stop recording. All right. Recording stopped.